Hey, everybody. Before we begin the show, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends at PowerPool. PowerPool is a mining pool and is one of the most profitable for miners. So if you have one miner at home or a fleet of miners at scale, point your workers to PowerPool to enjoy the best payouts. PowerPool supports a number of algorithms, SHA-256 for Bitcoin, X11 for Dash, and others. And of course, we're focused and we care about the most, S-CRYPT for Litecoin, Dogecoin, and now Bell's Coin, merge mining. Pointing your workers to PowerPool is easy with its simple user interface, and the platform also has all the reporting available that your operation needs. Typically, PowerPool extends a low 1% pool fee. However, if you register with the 84 million link in the show notes, you will lock in a sub 1% pool fee, which is excellent. Cheers, happy mining. Hello and welcome to the 84 Million podcast. Today we're on episode number 38, and our guest today is Dr. Kapil Amarasinghe, or Dr. Cap. What do we say about him? He's the lead advisor to BasicSwapDex. He's a privacy enthusiast who's been active in cryptocurrency since 2016. He's also an emergency medicine physician and consultant by profession. So, Dr. Cap, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carl. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it was good to see you. I met you, I guess, about 2 weeks ago now in Las Vegas, and David Schwartz was with you, and you guys came over to me. I shook your hand, said hello, and that was after I had seen your presentation. I've reviewed it since. You're doing really cool things, but maybe before we get into our topic today, you can tell us maybe some of the highlights of the Litecoin Summit. What was your experience there?
So I had a great time. It was my second time at the Litecoin Summit. So I was there last year in Nashville, and I was here in Las Vegas this year. I really love the Litecoin guys. So one thing I took from last year was just how pragmatic you guys are. The Litecoin community is one of the most pragmatic communities in cryptocurrency. And David Schwartz, I have a huge admiration for him, and by in turn respect to Charlie Lee and everyone in the Litecoin team, because they're really looking at Litecoin from a non-speculative usage point of view, and they have a huge focus on financial privacy. So those are two things that within cryptocurrency are really important to me. I mean, I'm not here for speculative pump and dumps. I'm here to actually build and encourage adoption of infrastructure that is meaningful to everyday people's lives. And I don't think you can have a fluid financial architecture that doesn't embrace privacy. So understanding that implementation of MWeb, and particularly the panel from that at the end of 2024 really set that tone where it was like, we are in this for non-speculative adoption. But to then be back in Nashville, in Las Vegas this year, more of the same. But what really stood out, one of the things that really stood out actually in terms of the talks was it was LitVM. Mm-hmm. So it was the idea of, and this is relevant to BasicSwap actually. So the idea of an EVM, an Ethereum virtual machine that is basically writes its proofs as zero knowledge proofs to the Litecoin blockchain, but basically allows you to do UTXO wrapped tokens of what would be traditionally Ethereum tokens. So ETH and any of its associated token architecture, those can actually be wrapped into UTXO tokens that are trustlessly proofed onto the Litecoin blockchain. And that to me is amazing, because you can now have these wrapped assets that don't require a trusted third party that can now be traded. I'm really keen to explore, will that mean, could we potentially get, MWeb? Is that something that way it support trustless MWeb sending and transference of these wrapped assets? What's the potential here for integrations with BasicSwap? Could we basically utilize, we'll talk about BasicSwap in a minute. It's a decentralized exchange that's fully decentralized and highly privacy focused. But, is there potential now to incorporate UTXO wrapped Ethereum assets of any nature into BasicSwapDex, or even to run a version of BasicSwapDex that's potentially allowing for futures markets or derivatives of these sorts of. So to me, that was really interesting. Again, kind of, I keep saying it's Trust Mobile. They were in Nashville. I keep forgetting his name now, but he's an amazing speaker and advocate for the Litecoin space. Oh gosh, it's bad of me. I hope he's not watching this. But he's he was on one of the panels in terms of the sort of non-speculative adoption here with some of the other guys. So kind of seeing Litecoin being integrated into services, such as travel, such as mobile data, that to me that's what this is about.
Yeah, that's good. I think his name is John from Stack Mobile.
Yeah.
And then we also had the Vacation Genie folks regarding that. And then, of course, LitVM. So they're the newer ones to the scene. And I think we were all excited to kind of hear them unpack or give their presentation. So they're brand new. I'm interested to see how people are using, LitVM. And then, of course, we had Clemens and Laura. They were there last year, and I think they were there in 2022 as well. I wasn't at that summit, but they have the Litecoin computer. So there's a lot of L2 kind of smart contract stuff cropping up for Litecoin, which is interesting. In terms of the wrap stuff, I don't use it. I know we had wrapped Litecoin with Jinji last fall, and I believe that's still around. I'll link it in the show notes. I'll have to find that link. And then Coinbase is going to release a wrapped Litecoin too. That was announced last month, so I think that's any time now. So it's interesting to see what's kind of cropping up on Litecoin. Yes, I want to talk about BasicSwapDex. This will be the last personal question. How is it that you transitioned, or how do you balance the crypto world and your emergency medicine world?
So I work less than full time in emergency. I'm an active consultant, So I think how do I balance this? I treat them almost like two totally separate lives. So the people I work with in emergency medicine, they know I'm involved with the crypto stuff, and anyone who's interested in listening, I will talk their ear off about finance and the history of this stuff and where it's going. Anyone who's interested. But they are very much two separate lives. The cryptocurrency stuff, that the work that I do in advisory and my interest in cryptocurrency and finance and the broader political and geopolitical, I'll call it a project, as it were, that stuff that I treat, it's like a hobby to me, and it's something that I find I'm personally invested in. I find it incredibly rewarding. I got into cryptocurrency properly about in 2016. But I was aware of Bitcoin back in 2011. I actually sat on it every day for a year. I better buy some. I just came across it by accident and read up on it. It's like, oh, a non-inflationary, a deflationary currency. Like, this is going to go somewhere. My sixth sense went off, and for various reasons, I'd say one thing, and it is I went to the Bitcoin website in 2011, there's 10 different ways and light nodes and full nodes, and I'm just a really naive kid. I'm this is too complicated, but I'm just going to keep an eye.
Yeah.
And speculatively, it did actually I was in a year, this will probably go to 1,000, and it did. And I cried that day, by the way, because I hadn't bought any. It was coming back from a night shift. I was stuck in traffic. I was like, oh, I'd had this much. I was so upset. And I rage quit crypto for a few years. Randomly, an article appeared in my Google newsfeed one day. So in those intervening years, and at that time, I'd also been doing a lot of sort of entrepreneurial stuff. So doing small business and kind of exploring various things to do with startups and media. So I'd kind of I'd learned about business through failing in business, is how I like to joke about it. But I kind of understood the principles of actually setting up and running a functional business. When I came across an article on Ethereum in relation to the DAO, that was in 2016, and they talked about smart contracts, and they talked about Ethereum and how it was like a follow-up on Bitcoin. I looked, I was like, smart contracts, this is interesting. It can remove middlemen from traditional financial processes and traditional work-related processes. And in removing those middlemen, it can also reduce the cost and speed up the process. So this is going to create convenience because, anything that saves time, anything that creates convenience saves time.
Right.
And, saving time is money. That's literally it. So if you are creating convenience, you're creating value. So I could instantly see the value in smart contracts as a concept. And I thought, I'm going to make a speculative entry into Ethereum, having seen what happened with Bitcoin. So I did that. And, I got into Poloniex. discovered all these other projects, started going down the rabbit hole. One of the projects that what led me to the advisory today essentially was a project called the Particle Project. It was actually a precursor project called Shadow Cash, but the Particle Project was basically building a decentralized peer-to-peer privacy-focused marketplace, an eBay-style marketplace for the buying and selling of real-world goods. And that also excited me. I was like, that has obvious value because it had no commissions. It was heavily privacy-focused. So I was like, okay, this is obvious to me. Like, let me get involved. And I started becoming a member of their community actively. I became a very big advocate for that project. So, as an advocate for Ethereum, advocate for the Particle Project. As time passed on, I became much more, even though Ethereum was performing speculatively well, I became much more interested in Particle because of their focus on privacy. And as I went down that rabbit hole, I began to understand the importance of privacy much more and more. So it was very much a two-way. It was giving and getting. So this was a continuous learning process for me. Going down that rabbit hole from 2016 onwards, I didn't just come in as like a casual retailer, let me take a punt and gamble. It was more, let me actually I was kind of really coming to appreciate and learn and understand how broader financial markets and systems worked. Initially it started off by saying, oh, look at all these bots trading. Okay, I can see what's going on there. Look at market movements. Look at Wyckoff theory. Look at the theory of reflexivity. So started exploring these various different financial theories, seeing how they relate to general market movements, really coming to appreciate and understand the underlying architecture on an infrastructure level behind blockchain, and then really getting into understanding the ideology and philosophy behind it. It really aligned with my values of self-sufficiency. So essentially, I will, if I'm responsible for my own destiny, I feel responsible for the people around me. I don't want to feel like I'm dependent on anyone or feel like I'm a burden to anyone. So I feel like a lot of the values of cryptocurrency and the ethos from which it was born aligned naturally with me. And actually, that long process of learning, that's what's, led me to, I became an advisor in 2019, and, that's kind of what's led me here. Sorry, that was a long answer, but
sure. No, it was good. I think I like when these things are articulated, because that sort of explains my story on many levels, on how I entered and how I ignored for a while and came back and things like that, especially the Bitcoin one. But yeah, the user experience was really bad. I mean, I know people still think it's tough, but it's way better than it was, back, 10 plus years ago. But I think the whole philosophical angle and like the principle angle of these currencies is like why they're here. It's not because we want a big, degenerate casino. I mean, that seems to be a part of it now, but sometimes you wonder if the folks coming in 2024, 2025 and buying meme coins, and hey, some of those are proof of work, I'm okay with it. But it's just not the same as, the environment when cryptocurrency was born. Inflation problems, those haven't gone away. Speaking of, the times, Chancellor on the brink of bailout, that's on the inscription of Block Zero Bitcoin, right? It was all about big economic problems and kind of this being a solution to those problems. So sometimes I wonder about the sound money aspect or the principles of, as you said, deflationary programmed money. These are all the things we're here for, and privacy, things like that. And sometimes I think it's been wiped out, but I think I'm wrong. And then I have conversations and I hear that, other people are still here for the kind of the original ideas, and there's more to it than that. But I think, it's definitely more than NGU, right? And it seems like almost everything is just NGU, NGU, NGU. And how can I make a, 5,000% swing or whatever? But I digress. So we're going to talk about BasicSwapDex. I will link your presentation in the show notes from the summit, as well, for folks to check out if they haven't already. I highly recommend they do that. But maybe before you dive in, and we have specific kind of, we look at it specifically, what's the TLDR of BasicSwapDex? What's the overview in just a few words or sentences?
Fine. BasicSwapDex is a decentralized exchange. It is the world's, so think of it like the Swiss banking of Forex for cryptocurrency. The world's most private, secure, non-custodian KYC-free cryptocurrency swap service or exchange. Okay, so it's a decentralized exchange. It's used for trading cryptocurrencies. So that's why I say it's like the equivalent of Forex, but for cryptocurrencies. And the reason I say it's like Swiss banking, but for cryptocurrencies, because the underlying architecture for BasicSwapDex is designed in such a way as to preserve privacy at every single level imaginable. So that's the short of it.
And how long I guess, when was the software published initially? How long has this DEX been running?
So the DEX kind of went properly live from around 2021. So 2021, 2022, the actual development began around 2019. And then kind of the initial releases came around 21, 22. And it's kind of just been steadily developing from then.
And you have multi-currency support. It's not just privacy coins.
Yes, it's not just privacy coins. So at the minute it supports Bitcoin, Litecoin. It supports the balances on MWeb, and when the update for Litecoin comes in with view keys, it will support Litecoin MWeb. It supports Dash, PIVX, Fero, Monero, Wownero, Decred, Namecoin. There's actually a whole bunch. It supports both public and private coins, and it's generally optimized for coins that utilize UTXO architecture.
Very cool. Let's look at maybe atomic swaps. So that's an old kind of dream. It's an old idea. I think Bitcoiners and Litecoiners, we used to think, I think it was with SegWit that allowed that to happen. We've had SegWit for a number of years. Litecoin proved it. And we thought of this, let's look into atomic swaps. And I think there's submarine swaps and different varieties of these things. I'm not sure if people are thinking about those anymore. So tell us what an atomic swap is and why it's going to help maybe exchanging cryptocurrencies.
So think of it as a cross-chain swap. So the best way to think of it is synchronize two blockchains together, create a kind of conditional contract between them. So it's create a conditional contract between them that has a shared secret. And in the steps of initiating the steps for the atomic swap basically means that when it's complete, it'll trigger a transfer of funds from A to B on this blockchain and from C to D on the corresponding blockchain, on the counterparty blockchain. And what links them is this kind of smart contract with a shared secret. And essentially what happens is when you go through the steps, when you basically at one point that secret will be exposed, and that secret is the same to trigger both the transaction on both the party and counterparty side. So basically, I feel like I'm explaining this in a really convoluted way, but basically it's a shared secret, and when one party sees that secret, the other party will see the same secret, and that secret will allow a transfer to occur on two separate blockchains that are linked. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I know it's supposed to be very fast.
Yeah, correct? I say it's as fast as the blockchains that are involved.
Yeah.
So if
2.5 minutes and 10 minutes with Bitcoin, for example, or Litecoin to Bitcoin.
Litecoin to Bitcoin, the rate limiting step is going to be Bitcoin because it's 10 minutes for that confirmation to occur. And with Litecoin, the Litecoin side of that swap will take about 2.5 minutes to confirm, but the swap will complete within 10 minutes. So the fastest chain generally, if you've got two chains that have very short confirmation times, that's the confirmation time for the transaction, is the longest one, as it were.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where again, we're looking at trustlessness, no middlemen. I mean, this is just contract executing this exchange. You're not using, even you're using your exchange because it's offered on that, but it's basically two chains communicating within your infrastructure. And you're funding this right now is what I'm understanding, these atomic swaps.
So what do you mean by funding?
Do you already have them? Like, is it already baked in for you to be able to do this on your platform? I want to say I saw a crowdfunding effort. Just
no, it already works. So the atomic swaps already. So the BasicSwapDex is an atomic swap DEX.
Okay,
all the swaps.
Everything is an atomic swap. I didn't know.
Every single swap on BasicSwapDex is an atomic swap DEX. So, it is, there are no middle, the whole infrastructure is designed in such a way that there are no centralized parties or no trusted parties at any point in this. Everything is basically automated via the underlying, the underlying smart contract execution for atomic swaps. And, I use that term loosely because I almost feel like this is me getting a bit techie. It's like describing it as a smart contract. It feels like proto smart contracts. It's very simple, very determinate code, as it were, with atomic swaps. So it is literally just a very specific set of instructions and messages that have to be passed around between the relevant parties in a given swap. And what the information that's basically being passed around is essentially you're agreeing on a shared public key between two blockchains. And then essentially, that the sum of that you can combine two public keys to create a shared combined public key, and the sum of that shared combined public key is going to be equal to the sum of the shared combined private keys. So if both of you can see the shared combined public key, that's great. Sequence of steps occurs. Right, one side reveals their part of a private key. Then you can effectively, because you've got the shared public key, you can work out the other half of the private key, and then both sides of the swap can effectively occur. So it's very much like a conditional contract that occurs between two parties with no intermediaries, or with no trusted intermediaries, no human intermediaries. But the underlying layer that facilitates the atomic swaps is essentially a messaging layer. Now, in the past, before, DEXs came along, that would have to be things like email. You'd email these little instructions back and forth between the participants. Whereas, when the initial decentralized atomic swaps, the atomic swap exchanges, what they do is basically provide a messaging layer that allows these blockchains to then share these different messages to complete a swap.
Okay.
And that messaging layer can be fully automated. And that's what it is in our case. It's the SMSG layer, which is short for secure messaging. So powering basic swaps architecture is the secure messaging layer. And what that is, it's a messaging layer and in protocol. So it's an encryption protocol and messaging layer. So SMSG, which powers the sending of messages back and forth to facilitate the atomic swaps to be automated. That's fully encrypted. There's full end-to-end encryption, so outsiders can't see what the messages being passed back and forth between the participants of a swap are. That process is automated again because it's a protocol. And sorry, I'm almost losing my train of thought here, but
no, it's a lot of great stuff. And actually, I crossed a few things on my list. First of all, I didn't know everything on your DEX was an atomic swap. Yeah. And that also solves the everything is full reserve, because you can't swap something that doesn't exist. So there's no solvency issues. And I was going to ask you about the SMSG, and you just sort of unpacked that for us. So you've got, and you said this in your presentation, kind of a multi-layer approach to security. Maybe you could unpack some of that for us. And maybe SMG is just one part of that.
Yeah, SMSG is just one part of it. So the underlying messaging layer that makes BasicSwapDex, our decentralized atomic swap DEX, possible is that SMSG layer. It's a messaging layer. It employs full end-to-end encryption for all messages that are passed back and forth between nodes. So BasicSwapDex is a peer-to-peer node-based DEX. You've got, every time someone spins up an instance of BasicSwapDex, they're basically running a node. So
you download this to whatever platform you're using. It's not like you log in on a website or whatever, or use an app. Well, maybe you have an app. I think you are building a mobile app.
We're building a mobile version of this, but okay. I'll get to that in a bit.
But everybody has their own instance. You have your own package on your machine. Okay.
Yeah. You basically download the BasicSwap software to your machine. You launch it. When you do that, you're basically setting up a node of a BasicSwap node that then connects to other BasicSwap nodes on the BasicSwap network. You leave that node running like a server. So as long as that node is running, it can receive and send messages from the BasicSwap network. The messaging layer that powers the BasicSwap network is called SMSG, which is secure messaging. That is a fully end-to-end encrypted messaging protocol. And so that means that third parties can't see or intercept the messages. Well, even if they intercept, they can't see the contents of the messages being passed on this network. Those messages are used to do two things: facilitate the spread of exchange of messages to enable atomic swaps, and also to facilitate the exchange of messages to construct the order books that actually operate on BasicSwap as well. And for this reason, this is why we can actually offer a fully decentralized distributed order book. So like, say, it is order based. So it's like bid ask. It's not liquidity pools like with automated market makers. It's literally, this is the set order. We will take it at this set price. And if you bid for it, you will get it at that price. You don't get the risk of someone pulls the liquidity from elsewhere and then the average goes down and you get a different price to what's expected. So it's not like that. You get the price you ask for, or that's been set. So yeah, that's how it happens.
Very cool. Maybe we should talk about. Well, I have a few things here. What is the likelihood of a swap failure? I mean, is that possible? How do you mitigate that?
So the likelihood, once the swap process starts, it's automated. So it will just proceed. Now, if for whatever so there are a couple of things that could happen. The node that's hosting that particular wallet or that particular swap, if that node goes offline, then the messages for the swap may not get transmitted, then the swap may not proceed. There is an automatic timeout built into every single atomic swap. I believe it's around, I think it's 24, is it 48 hours? But basically, if the swap times out, then the funds for the participants of that swap, they will get fully refunded.
Okay.
So even if the swap doesn't go through, for whatever reason, so say the person whose node is involved in that swap, if that node goes offline, all that will happen is it will trigger a timeout condition. When the timeout occurs, a refund will take effect.
Okay.
So that's one thing. And that's automated. The other thing that can occur is, say an atomic swap process has started, one of the participants may choose to manually cancel that swap. This is a form of, essentially, that can be used in good faith. It's like, okay, I've changed my mind, or it could be used in bad faith, I'm trolling. Now, bearing in mind it's atomic swaps, now there are no third-party fees on the network, but there are, if you do a Litecoin transaction from address A to address B, there is going to be a small fee on the Litecoin blockchain for that transaction to occur. And likewise, depending on where you are in the atomic swap process, if a transaction is started, you can it can be cancelled. The funds will still, the base amounts will still be returned minus any transaction fees that have already been deducted. Does that kind of make sense?
Right.
So there is that this is very much a manual thing where you'd have to kind of intentionally cancel. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So those are the two areas. But the nice thing is your basic funds, if you put up like $500 for an order, it's the same as if you put $1,000 or $100,000 or $1 million. They're not a risk because you're always maintaining full control of the funds. So even if the swap doesn't go ahead, it's not like the funds are stuck in limbo forever. It's not like there's any risk of a third party saying we're freezing this transaction, because there is no third party involved. It's not like there's some outsider looking at the process and going, oh, we don't like what's going on here. Stop it. Hit stop. That can't happen. It's just either the swap proceeds to completion or a timeout triggers and the refund conditions are met and then refund occurs. But sorry, that was a bit of a suggestion. You were asking me about many layers of privacy, but SMSG is one of them. And going back to those swaps and going back to the people can't see what you're doing. Well, I talked about atomic swaps. The traditional method for atomic swaps is something called hash time locked contracts, HTLC.
Okay.
And what you're basically doing there is you are syncing up the blockchains for the coins that you wish to swap. So say you sync up the Litecoin blockchain to the Bitcoin blockchain, and you create a conditional contract. And when that contract's executed, or as it's executing, it will leave timestamps on the respective blockchain. and those timestamps will have hashes. And the thing about HTLC is, okay, that those sort of stamps, you can look at, if you're doing chain analysis as an outsider, you can look and go, okay, looking at this transaction hash, it looks like this may have been involved in an atomic swap. And looking at the contents of this hash, I can correlate it in time to this transaction, which has a similar hash. So I can see that the atomic swap probably occurred between these two coins at this point in time. So that's the traditional HTLC method. Whereas BasicSwapDex, it utilizes a different method for atomic swaps called adapter signatures, which is essentially an implementation of something called script scripts. And what that basically means is one of the coin, you can swap with traditional HTLC coins. Both coins need to have programmable inputs. So both coins need to be scriptable in order for them to be able to participate in atomic swaps. With adapter signatures, only one of the coins needs to be scriptable in order for this swap to be, for two coins to be able to trade with each other. Now, that's the interesting thing about adapter signatures is that they don't leave the traditional timestamps that HTLC swaps do. So you may look at, if you're again doing third-party chain analysis, you can look at the blockchains and you might see there's something that looks a little bit funny about this transaction. Like there's a little bit of extra data. It could be a swap. It might not be. I'm not sure. And it doesn't leave a typical type of it doesn't leave like a correlatable timestamp trace with the corresponding blockchain with the counterparty. So it's like you can look at the other blockchain, say Bitcoin, and go, it's something funny, but it's not really definitely an atomic swap. And it doesn't, I can't clearly see that it's linked. They didn't occur at the exact time. You can't say they definitely occurred. So actually, it's really difficult from a chain analysis point of view to say that definitely was an atomic swap and it definitely occurred between these two coins at this point in time. So you get that layer of privacy. And then the other nice thing is because it's adapter signatures, because that means only one of the coins needs to be scriptable. That means you are actually enabling atomic swaps for coins that could not be swappable under HTLC method. Such as Monero or Litecoin MWeb. Litecoin MWeb, Monero, Zcash, these are coins that lack scripting capability. Well, I'm not sure about Zcash, but I know Monero and Litecoin MWeb, they lack scripting capabilities. So in the past, they wouldn't have been able to participate in atomic swaps at all. But with adapter signatures, because you only need the counterpart, as long as the counterparty coin has some scripting ability, that's fine. You can atomic swap them. But again, that means now you can do atomic swaps with privacy coins such as Litecoin MWeb, Monero, Zcash, other privacy coins. And so that's how you get those many layers of privacy. So that's how we got to this in a long-winded way.
It was very good. I don't think anything like that is easy to, explain in 2 seconds or whatever. So we appreciate you going into the details. Are other people doing this, or is this just a BasicSwapDex, like you're a first to achieve this sort of capability, especially with these, you described them as previously non-swappable coins are now able to be atomically swapped. Are you pioneering all this, or are you taking kind of code from others that have already implemented this?
So we are pioneering a lot of this. So the Monero atomic swaps, the proof of concept was achieved, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember which year. It was achieved, the proof of concept for atomic swaps with Monero was actually achieved before BasicSwap went live. But I think we were definitely the first to effectively deploy Monero atomic. We were the first decentralized exchange to actually apply. So when I say the proof of concept, this was as the manual process of swapping messages, basically.
Right.
But we were the first decentralized exchange to provide an automated way of doing Monero atomic swaps. And we were the first to deploy as taker only. And because of that SMSG layer, it allows you to kind of create orders that utilize a taker template, but actually functionally is a maker template. So then we became the first decentralized exchange to offer bi-directional atomic swaps for Monero. So both maker and taker. And because we've been able to achieve it for Monero, that same underlying technique and architecture can be used to enable bidirectional Monero atomic swaps for MWeb coins, such as Litecoin MWeb. So this, we are the first, essentially. We are pioneers in this field. We're definitely one of the first decentralized exchanges to offer a fully decentralized distributed order book. So a lot of the atomic swap dexes that came before, they may have centralized server setups in terms of constructing their order book, or they may utilize a peer-to-peer architecture, but it's not decentralized in the sense that anyone can just spin up an instance. Do you get what I mean? So that's another area where I'd say we were kind of pioneering. So certainly in terms of our approach to privacy decentralization, we've pioneered it technically in a lot of ways.
It's exciting stuff.
And again, with the and again, a lot of the stuff we're doing with the mobile version of Atomic, so enabling atomic swaps for mobile devices, a lot of the stuff we're doing there, that's pioneering. So yeah.
And I want to talk about that in a moment. Let's just maybe compare what you're doing or what you've built. These dexes, you have a privacy-centric dex versus like a centralized exchange. I think a lot of us still use centrally, Coinbase, Gemini, whatever. What are the advantages of using, for example, your platform to, access cryptocurrency and maybe liquidate your own cryptocurrency versus using a centralized exchange?
Okay. Firstly, there's no KYC. So you download this software. Once you get through the initial setup phase, you download this software, run the BasicSwap node at home. You're running it like a server. You're accessing the BasicSwap network. You can see all the orders on the order book. At no point is anyone going to ask you to create an account. At no point is anyone going to ask you to give up your email, name, date of birth, address, who you went to school with, etc. No one cares about that here, and no one wants to know. So that's the first thing. So there's no KYC. Then you get access to a platform which has those many layers of privacy that I've described. So third parties aren't going to see the messages that you are sending across on that network. They're not going to, the only way at the minute to see a BasicSwapDex order book is to spin up an instance of BasicSwapDex. So it's not like, we can't tell you what we can tell you what the orders are on the order books. If an order disappears, it's probably been taken, or if it's been partially filled, that will be apparent. But I can't tell you the daily volumes because that's, those messages are all encrypted. So that's the first thing, and again, there are many ways that people can't look and see what you're swapping at. The other thing is we're not like Coinbase or Kraken, because Coinbase, Kraken, your Binance, they're all centralized service providers who A, will ask for your account details, and B, will charge you a third-party fee every time you do a transaction. So there'll be a percentage of your trade that will basically go to their coffers. Well, we don't do that because there is no third party to send money to for a start. It's a peer-to-peer network. So when you do your swaps with people, it's the transaction fee for sending Litecoin from address A to address B, and the transaction fee for sending Bitcoin from address C to address D. That's it. There's no other fees. So it's really cheap. It's really private. It's incredibly secure for the reasons I've just said. Either, it's all atomic swaps. So either they complete or they time out and you get the participants get refunded. So it's really secure and there's no KYC. So those are the main benefits. I feel like there's probably a whole bunch of others, but I'm just forgetting them right now. So
I think of KYC too, and that's come up a lot lately. And I think, a lot of us are used to, I can't remember if, once upon a time, maybe we used a Coinbase without it. I think it's always been there. There may have been a time where it was so young where they didn't require those things. But like you said, if you're using Kraken, any major exchange, they're going to ask for that, right? The KYC. And we have to think, oh no, there's no KYC. It's like we've been kind of programmed in a sense to be in the KYC, but there's a lot of problems with it. And it's like, it's not incumbent on the individual. It's the organization is required to collect that. It's not like you're dealing with cryptocurrency, surrender all your details. That's just what they request of you because they're pressured by governments and regulatory agencies to do that. And you're not set up that way. Therefore, none of it applies. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it doesn't apply. Our underlying architecture, it doesn't apply. So I think the best analogy that we would give, our network is more comparable to the SWIFT network, which is, again, SWIFT is a messaging service between banks. That, the banks are in the SWIFT scenario, a bank is a node, and it uses the SWIFT service as a messaging layer to basically verify swaps of currencies, or transactions between respective banks.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you don't require, SWIFT doesn't KYC all of its customers. So why should we have to? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I'm clarifying it because I think some people are very cautious with crypto, with regulation. Some people are going to be anarchists and don't care. They're going to do whatever they want. Others are more, maybe say, order-based, rules-based people that say, I want to not, risk my life or my family, and this stuff freaks me out, and I want to be in the narrow, whatever that means, because it's all gray. But I say this because the organizations collecting KYC are required based upon how they are functioning as a centralized entity. If you're not centralized, it doesn't apply to you. So in other words, there's not any legal concerns for using your platform like you're breaking some unwritten rule somewhere. The point is your structure is totally different where it does not even require it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
there is no
about using this.
Yeah, basically there is no centralized authority that you're basically that runs the underlying architecture. So there's no centralized authority that necessarily has to report. The current legal structures don't really account for that, and in order for them to account for that, you would then have to apply similar. This is legal theory. I'm not a lawyer,
sure,
but
neither am I.
In order to account for that, if you were to impose the sorts of KYC requirements on us, then I would argue you'd have to do that with the SWIFT network, and that would just be ridiculous. That would be non-functional. Right. That would make the financial system completely non-functional.
Yep.
I think KYC is interesting as a holdover from the days of centralized architecture. Mm-hmm. You had centralized entities, you had people who were responsible parties. Essentially money was flowing through in and out of their hands, and okay, if you take the good faith interpretation of KYC, I think there's a good faith interpretation of KYC, and I think there's a bad faith interpretation of KYC. And when I say, as in, there's a bad faith. So the good faith interpretation of KYC is, look, we genuinely want to stop money laundering. We want to stop the flow of funds that could be used to exploit or harm individuals. Right. That I get. Mm-hmm. Okay, so at the end of the day, if you're, Joe Bloggs sitting in his office and you're a bank manager and you see accounts have come from, North Korea or some Mexican drug cartel, mm-hmm. One would think or hope that you have and that's clearly then going to be used to buy a bunch of nukes. You'd think that person would possibly have the responsibility to raise a flag.
Right.
That's fair enough. You've got a network there where you've got a central person dealing with essentially non-transparent movement of funds. Sorry, with transparent movement of funds which are transparent to them.
Right.
So you could argue, okay, that you've got a duty there to kind of, know who you're dealing with. If I enter into a personal agreement with you, if we decide after the show, I'm going to lend you some money, I probably want to know a little bit more about you just in case something goes wrong so I can chase it up. That's fair enough. I get that. But that's utilizing centralized setups that fundamentally are built on trust assumptions. So that's why I say KYC is a legacy of centralized banking systems. Mm-hmm. And I get that. The bad faith interpretation of KYC is that, I'll get it. And this is where all the problems with KYC and the modern ecosystem come into, is that
they're compounding,
actually,
yes.
Yeah, which are compounding, which is you trust that the authorities that are looking after your data are not going to misuse it in ways that could actually be used to harm you, or you trust that they will secure it in ways where it will not be stolen from them and then passed on to third parties to be misused against you. So that's the problem with KYC. And whilst the well-intentioned approach of KYC is to prevent or to try and protect the world and people from the negative consequences of what things like I've described, in practice, that stuff still goes on. Humans are corruptible. People can be paid to turn a blind eye. And on the flip side, humans are corruptible. People can be paid to turn a blind eye. People can be coerced into turning a blind eye. And that's why you can get, for instance, low-level workers in Coinbase, in third parties of Coinbase potentially being bribed to give out the personal information of their customers to other malicious bad actors who will then use it to extort you, which has happened.
Right. I mean, it's a security concern. Yeah,
it's a huge security concern.
They're amassing piles of information, driver's licenses, national IDs, whatever. And it's sitting there. And I mean, that needs to be protected at all costs if it's going to be collected. And unfortunately, we're seeing that and I'm not saying Coinbase is trying to run a bit. I mean, they obviously want to succeed. They're going to do everything they can, but you cannot prevent these, like you said, certain players from bribery. I mean, it's a lot harder to keep that thing perfect than, how do I say it? Seeing the security vulnerabilities with KYC. And I think we're seeing more and more and more of those things. And we have to question this.
Yeah. I feel sympathetic to Coinbase as an organization. They have to KYC. They're legally required by the government to. I bet, I'm sure like the heads of Coinbase don't want to KYC. It is a huge, that is, you're taking on a load of personal information and then you have to secure that. That is a huge cost. And then you still have to use that in order to verify various processes in regards to your organization. That is a huge security risk. It would just be more straightforward to have a system whereby I've received this amount of money. I don't know who's gone, where it's come from. I don't know who it's going to, but there's no legal duty for me to have that information. I feel like sympathy that, they have that legal requirement, but I don't think they want to.
Yeah. Do you ever see KYC maybe legislatively rolling back due to all of this stuff that we're seeing in real time? I guess we have to, push for that. Individuals with governments and regulators say, hey, we don't want this. But I think some of us assumes if it's there, it's going to be there forever. But maybe that's a very pessimistic outlook. I know we're all in KYC now, but it's important to discuss this because this is a lot of information that people are giving in good faith and it's being leaked. And that's something that shouldn't be happening. So I'm curious if we could ever roll back, or do you believe it will ever be rolled back at this centralized level?
I hope so, but I'll tell you what I honestly think. I've talked about this previously. I think we're going to see, we live in a time of increasing financial instability. So I think our fiat ecosystem is inherently unstable. And the reason I say that is simple. If you are a central bank that issues a fiat currency that inflates 2% per annum, and that is compounding, well, following 2000, that's conservative, yes. So you're targeting 2%. It may be more, and it often is. Now, from 2007, 2008, that financial crisis, I'm a personal experiencer of this. I had money locked up in a savings account that was making less than 1% per annum in interest. In the meantime, the inflation rate was around 2% or more, and that was compounding every year. At the same time, my wages were not going up to match inflation. So in real terms, my pay as a doctor was falling year on year, to the point that from 10 years ago, my real terms pay is 25% less than it was a decade ago when you account for inflation. Now, the people who contribute non-speculatively to an economy, in Britain, we'll call them, it's the working classes and the middle classes, right? These are people who have professional jobs, laborers, etc. The majority of money they earn is held as savings. Most of these people, they don't understand finance. They don't understand investments. They will just keep it in savings. So those savings on 1%, their real-term spending power is falling because inflation is eroding away at it. So this is, in the meantime, people who do have significant net worth, who have significant spare reserves of money, they can afford to take the risks and put those into investments such as index funds, gold, bonds, ETFs, whatever. If you look at the performance of all of those investment asset classes, They have all outperformed putting your money in savings in a bank. All of them. You know, the best, one of the best investments in the last 15 years has been the S&P 500. Okay. But the reality is the majority of people who are putting money into those asset classes, they're wealthy. So the fiat structure of money, of central banking, because of the behaviors that it creates, you know, working 12 hours a day and living paycheck to paycheck is very different to someone who, you know, makes $300,000 a year and spends $100,000 a year. Very different. So this creates the conditions for compounding wealth inequality and compounding social inequality and compounding social instability. So to kind of answer your question, and I think we're seeing the effects of this increasingly. And I say compounding because you don't notice it at first, but then as the years tick by, it becomes more and more obvious because you see increasing levels of civil unrest, increasing levels of social division, increasing levels of mistrust, both in the government and in societies and in communities. Now, my deal here is, it's like, I feel like I'm seeing that in the last 5-6 years. I feel like I'm seeing that on, you know, and the response of governments that run on fiat economies, because they're essentially debt-based economies, you can't issue a debt without someone being owed a debt, right? So the people who hold that money that's owed to them, they want to make sure they're getting paid, right? You don't want the whole structure to just come crashing down if you're in charge of this thing. That's the way I look at it. So, well, you've got this rising civil unrest, declining social mobility. That's actually what I focus more on rather than wealth inequality. I don't want people to hear the phrase wealth inequality and go, this guy's a communist or a socialist. I want them to understand I talk primarily about social mobility. That's really important.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So that's what we're falling on, is like one of the consequences of exponentially increasing wealth inequality due to the reasons I've given is rapidly declining social mobility, rapidly declining public infrastructure, rapidly declining resources available to small and even medium enterprises. So it makes life harder for people who want to make something of themselves. It makes it physically harder to get around and travel. And that means, you know, people can't communicate, people can't exchange ideas. I'm a big believer in liquidity theory, which is that the more you have free flow of information, the better the exchange of ideas, the healthier your economy. So if you stifle the movement of liquidity, flow of people, the flow and exchange of ideas, you get a declining economy, a stagnating economy. And when you get people in stagnation, they become increasingly frustrated because they're seeing their living standards fall and they're getting angrier. And this is, you know, in a roundabout way to answer this, it's like, if you get a restless population and you're a government that's struggling to take control, you're in the UK, there's a natural tendency to veer towards authoritarianism, fascism, towards abuse of power. Yeah. Exactly. And I'm not commenting on any specific governments here. I think this is just a trend that can be observed in any government that is based on central banking fiat systems. Yeah. And I think you see it faster in countries with central banking fiat systems that have weaker governments and weaker currencies. So I'm not going to name names. I think it affects every single government in the world that utilizes this system. Okay, so this is just a process, and I'm a neutral observer. I'm an observer of it. Yeah. So to me, I think the tendency of governments is to then crack down and to impose increasingly authoritarian structures of surveillance. And there will be a tendency towards growing corruption. And I think what drives that is a lack of understanding of what I've just explained. Mm-hmm. So I think it's ignorance rather than necessarily malice.
Because it would expedite the same problem that you're describing by remedying it or whatever. Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, you know, if we had sound money we're talking about economics now. If we basically had sound money, crypto wouldn't be as compelling. Bitcoin would not occupy a special place in the world. Other than that, it's, you know, digital and, you know, it moves quicker than gold, for example. But if we actually had sound currencies at the national levels, and we had savings accounts that were functional, operating at 8% or 10% or whatever the market rate was, not a percentage or less, and we know why those interest rates are adjusted based on issuing new currency units. But if the money was sound, we wouldn't have all these problems. And you spoke of principles in the beginning. You're speaking kind of principles now, or at least I'm going to distill them from what you're sharing. And this is the whole case for cryptocurrency, right? For sound money, for systems that aren't deflating and having your labor being trapped in a vehicle that's reducing value year over year. If we were able to keep buckets of silver under the porch like 1940, I wouldn't be on buying Litecoin, for example. So I think that's a big point. That's the whole point of all of this, if you ask me, is it is a more sound form of money. So not all of it, not all of crypto is. Of course, there's lots of things out there that I wouldn't want to touch. And how many currencies do we have now, or tokens? 15 to 20,000. So not all of those are trying to solve sound money, but some of them are. And I think these considerations have not changed since day one. And I haven't seen them really improve either. So I appreciate your response on that. We did get in the weeds, but I'm glad we did. Sure. Let's go to Litecoin Summit. We're going to go back there. You talked about Nexus Wallet was released. Tell us about what we're doing with BasicSwap Mobile, and perhaps a plug-in with the Nexus Wallet, which is the new Litecoin Foundation official mobile wallet.
Yeah. So what we're doing, so again, this falls back into the things that we're sort of innovating and leading the field on. Atomic swaps, traditionally, they weren't available or possible to do on mobile devices traditionally. And the reasons for that are simple. In order to do atomic swaps, you need to download and sync blockchains for the coins you want to swap. And also you need to leave your device running that application that's facilitating the swap for the duration of the swap in order for the messages to be passed for the swap to then complete. And this is why, BasicSwapDex, as it is as a network, these are home networks of nodes running instances of BasicSwap-like servers. Now, we have basically figured out how to facilitate and enable atomic swaps as a taker only on mobile devices. So, and this all goes back to our underlying architecture, which is that sort of SMSG messaging layer. And the fact that you can, that the home version of BasicSwap is essentially a network of blockchains, of nodes, and it's a network of nodes that happen to be have downloaded and synced versions of blockchains that they are swapping coins to. So you've actually got essentially a network of block explorers. That's the wrong way of saying it, but that's the easy way of understanding it. So in terms of solving that persistence problem, firstly, if you are simply running a mobile version of BasicSwap, so BasicSwap on mobile would be a swap service, kind of like Changelly or like StealthX or God, I'm losing my mind now. But any of the swap services that your Shapeshift or any of the sort of traditional sort of centralized swap services that you use, whereas those may have KYC and rely on centralized parties. With BasicSwap, it's a swap on mobile. It will be a swap service. There's no KYC. It will allow you to swap coins that are supported by BasicSwapDex architecture. And basically, it'd be like it could be integrated into any sort of mobile or web application. We're proud to say that hopefully we're going to be one of the first integrations is going to be in the Nexus wallet. So when you load up the Nexus wallet and this thing's ready, you'll be able to swap Litecoin and Litecoin MWeb using atomic swaps, KYC free, privately, with the full benefits of that BasicSwap architecture, but on a mobile phone. And you'll be able to do that again without having to download blockchains on your mobile and without having to leave that application running, simply because that mobile service is essentially going to be utilizing an API that can just query all of the relevant data on the BasicSwap, on the home BasicSwap network, all those nodes that are actually already running. So does that make sense? I feel like I waffle a lot and go on tangents, and I don't want to lose you guys.
No, it does. I'm curious, is it just going to be a plugin, for example, to a Nexus to access a BasicSwap, or will you have a standalone app as well?
So this will be like a plugin for Nexus.
Okay.
What we're basically doing plugins for it's for any service that wants to have us on board. So we do have several integration partners lined up, and all of our integrations will include Litecoin. Those integrations, the way I see it is the more integrations we do into more wallets, into more services, the more access and liquidity there will be to Litecoin and Litecoin MWeb specifically for atomic swaps. So we are just broadening and this is the important thing to understand, is all of those integrations, they're going to be linked to the same liquidity, that same source of liquidity, which is that basic swap network. So the more integrations we have, not just as an add-on, we could do a separate application, BasicSwapDex mobile. Yeah, that's absolutely possible. We could develop that. But, regardless of regardless of where and who we integrate into, they're all still utilizing that liquidity in that home network of basic swap nodes. So this is simply encouraging the growth of liquidity and encouraging market makers to put liquidity into the BasicSwapDex order books, because they know that when they set this up, when market makers and liquidity providers set this up at home, they don't have any Binance or Kraken or Coinbase to pay a third-party fee to, because there's no third-party fee. So they're basically providing liquidity at the best possible price. And, the mobile users, they get a convenience service because it's a swap service. It's taker only. You can't make orders because you can't access the architecture in that way to do that on mobile. But you can certainly take offers that are on those order books. And it's a big combined order book that's shared across multiple integrations. I could get into the bit where you can set up private order books, and that it's actually possible to set up multiple order books on the basic swap network. So you can have custom order books as well if you want to have small OTC groups. There's a lot of stuff that I haven't gone into. There's a lot of power within the basic swap architecture to have customized instances relevant to your needs as either an end user or as an integration adopter or provider. But certainly with the Litecoin integration, we'd be doing Litecoin MWeb. With some of the other partners, we'd be looking to do Litecoin and Litecoin MWeb. Certainly with any integration partner, we want to get as many pairings as possible onto them. So that's to answer it.
That's good. I wasn't sure. I like that it's being distributed into others' apps, because I'm thinking of just even Apple and Google Play and whatever, they're gatekeepers. If you had just one app, and God forbid, but this doesn't, whatever, and they shut it down, it's going to be a lot harder to do, when you're plugged into all these other platforms. So I think that's great, because those are a concern for the same reasons that we talked about earlier. The gatekeepers of these applications. We have these wallets, we're used to them. Well, what happens when they delist them? I hope none of them are, but we have to realize that is possible with these things. So very good. So there's no fees, third-party fees. How can I ask how you generate revenue for the product? Or
yes,
just generally.
So if you talk about the future plans, so in terms of there's no fees, firstly. So in terms of how we've been funded up to now, BasicSwapDex has, as I said, I'm an advisor to BasicSwapDex and the Particle project. Now, the Particle project is the parent project to BasicSwapDex. Particle operates its own blockchain, has its own community. Within its own blockchain, it basically had its own governance system and had its own internal treasury. So that was used to help fund some of the development of this. Now, without getting into the specifics, that blockchain is highly illiquid. Trading volumes died. The treasury, while still functional, is probably going to be scrapped. And actually, because we're a community project, we've been reliant on community donations. And, for example, I'm going to give full credit to the Monero community here. They had a Monero CCS, which was to help, expedite and build on and help further develop BasicSwapDex. That was fully funded within less than an hour. And, that's really kind of helped drive a lot of our development from probably the last year and a half. We do currently have CCS via the Indigo platform on Litecoin for this current version for BasicSwapDex mobile. So, there's a $75,000 target. I don't get paid for this, by the way. I'm a volunteer. I find this stuff really fascinating. And I hope to those in the audience that are listening, they really understand that I'm doing this out of the pleasure of it really, and the ideology. So I'm very much a community member. This is very much voluntary for me, but the devs who build this, they have families, lives, children. They need to eat more than just ramen.
Absolutely.
We currently have it was $75,000 target. It should take us to just past the end of the year. It will basically be enough to kind of get the development phase for this. I mean, we're going to develop it anyway. I won't lie to you. We are going to just keep plowing, but this will really help kind of make that development smooth, much more secure, much more straightforward, much faster. So, if you guys can check out, that link to the CCS on the Indigo platform and contribute, that will be really helpful. Moving forward, when we get the mobile version ready, our hope is that we can probably do a rev share agreement. So going back, there will never be third-party fees if you're running Basic Swap as a node at home. Never. Okay, let's make this clear. That's it. But if you are, say, an integration provider and you've adopted Basic Swap as a swap service into your wallet, say the Nexus wallet, say other wallets, we don't have an issue with you say, look, this is a convenience service you're providing to casual users, retail, who may want to swap coins. If you want to charge a small fee like 2%, you can charge a lower fee than every other competing swap service because we don't have the overheads of centralized swap services, by the way. This architecture means we can scale without any kind of cost overhead. It's just more people at home setting up more nodes. So actually the way we scale is in a manner that's potentially profitable to whoever actually spins a node of Basic Swap and runs it as a maker. But yeah, so I was going back to what I was saying, an integrating third party can just be like, okay, 2% fee. And, I guess that could be like a UTXO split on this transaction. And we could say, look, a portion of that could go into a treasury to help our development, like say 0.5%. To be fair, this is kind of, 0.5% is basically what we're setting as our kind of, that's what we expect, for third party integration. So if you're using the mobile service, you want to do a swap, maybe there's like for the minimum of a 0.5% fee plus whatever the integrating partner offers on top. So that integrating partner gets a profit. And then we get some funds that then go either into a treasury or can be used, essentially in a manner to help facilitate the development of the project. So that's our case. It's community driven ultimately, but with the pragmatic business point of view.
Sure, absolutely. And I think there needs to be those incentives for people to actually build this stuff out. Some people think everything should be built for free, and it's like, I don't think so. So I would encourage people to go to litecoin.com and go to the project section and find BasicSwapDex. I'm going to link it in the show notes. It looks like there's already 5,421 donated, and Charlie Lee's matching them 1 for 1. So he's also going to match 5,421. So that's a significant contribution from him, from Charlie's side, that he continues to do this over the next few years. So yeah, I'd encourage you to go and if you support what Dr. Cap is sharing, donate to this and help fund this project, specifically in our case for Nexus, but pardon me. So financial sovereignty, obviously you're a proponent. We'll land the plane maybe with this. How does BasicSwapDex realize financial sovereignty for individuals that use it?
You're in control. That's it.
You're in control.
You're in control. That's it.
Where do we find it?
BasicSwapDex.com. Go to the website. The GitHub, everything is linked from that website, but that's your starting point. You can also follow us on Twitter at BasicSwapDex. I encourage you to do that.
And we can find you at The Greatest Doc, by the way.
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is at The Greatest Doc. So if you want to DM me or ask questions or just follow me, that's perfectly fine. But the other thing I would say is if you go, we have, for BasicSwapDex, we have channels on Telegram. They're combined channels on Telegram and Matrix. So our chat rooms is generally where our developers and core community hang. So if you are interested in doing integrations or adding coins for support or finding out more about the project, or if you've got issues in terms of setup, there's always people in the element/matrix, or Telegram. It's a combined channel. So just go to those channels and ask around. But we've got lots of guides on the website as well. And yeah.
Very good. Very good. I will be following you. I already do follow you. I'm going to definitely be following this project. Any final words before we close the show out today?
I want to thank the Litecoin community. I have to say, I'm just really impressed with the Litecoin community. I think, 2 years before we went to Nashville, it wasn't a project that I'd followed for a while. And then when I found out you guys were doing MWeb and I was really interested, I think you guys are a wonderful community. I think you guys have a wonderful pragmatic vision that is based not on exploiting people, but helping them to grow. And I hope you continue to engage in realizing a world that is some positive, not some zero. I think that is a great, amazing thing about you guys. And actually, just thank you so much for having me on, because these are the chats that matter to me at the end of the day. All the stuff we talked about today, I just want other people to understand this stuff, keep their ears open. It's really important. That's how you find freedom, is understanding this stuff. Or not how you find freedom. It helps. It gets you on the road to it anyway. So keep doing what you're doing, Carl.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to have you, and glad to see what you're building and what you're representing. Again, everyone, check out BasicSwapDex. Check out Dr. Cap at the Litecoin Summit. I'm going to link that in the show notes. Donate to the project if you're able, and Charlie will match that. So yeah, great episode. Glad to have you here today. We'll be following you, sir. For everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching us on X, on YouTube, wherever you find your podcasts. Of course, you can see this episode and all the other ones at 84million.com/podcast. So thanks for listening today. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. Dr. Cap, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.